Hi again, folks. This is your Serial Cynic here in New York City. And please forgive me, I'm going to have to pull this hoodie over my head, and I'll explain why in a minute. So, if you're looking at this video, some people, I know this is a threatening look, so hopefully you don't feel that way. I just have to put the hoodie over my head because, as you can see, I don't have much hair in my head, and it's a little cool out there. And if you know anything about your body, you tend to know that at your extremities, if you have them exposed, then you tend to either make your body colder or hotter. So, this is an extremity. It's cool out there. Cool air is touching my head, making the rest of my body feel cold. Not only that, I'm struggling with a little bit of a cold right now. Came back from my home island of St. Thomas in the U.S. Virgin Islands. And this cold was not because of the weather change. Because, of course, I was down there dealing with 85-degree temperatures every day. To come back up here, the weather's been pretty nice, but today we have overcast skies. And even though I guess we're supposed to get up to like maybe the lower 70s, the upper 60s, which is pretty nice, without the sun, the weather tends to be rather cool. And I think we're supposed to be having some rain later on this afternoon anyway. So please forgive me if this looks threatening to you. All right? Everything's good. I'm not going to jump out of my camera and rob anybody or do anything crazy. Not my style, okay? Not me at all. But yes, like I mentioned, I was home in the U.S. Virgin Islands. Came back last week. I was down there for a couple of weeks. My first time going back since last April, actually. But it's my first time there since the hurricanes slammed into our islands. And for those of you who are familiar with what transpired down there, 2 Category 5 hurricanes slammed into the U.S. Virgin Islands. Okay? Some of the islands experienced one or the other of those hurricanes, Maria or Irma. But here in the U.S. Virgin Islands, we experienced both of them. Irma tended to do a little bit more damage on the northern side of the U.S. Virgin Islands, St. Thomas and St. John, while Maria really beat up on St. Croix, which is further south, because Irma passed further south. But now that I'm back, I went over there and I made certain observations. And this observation that I made, it's always been there, but this observation that I made can apply to just about anywhere in the Caribbean. And one of the things is that a small little island like mine, St. Thomas, in years past, long before my time, we had an agricultural community there. That is no longer the case. We still have agriculture on the western end of the island, but it's not like we're growing things that other nations are buying from us wholesale. You know, people may have their little farms where they plant little things for themselves, or they may sell them to local folks. People come to them to buy the stuff from them. But what is disappointing is the fact that we now rely strictly, pretty much, on tourism and the federal government because we're under the U.S. flag. There's some good to that, but it bothers me. Because now what this means is that we become somewhat like a welfare state, where I don't know if we have that sense of that drive to do whatever we need to do to somehow come up with other means of generating income. So what tends to happen is we can kick back and kick up our feet because we feel that the federal government is going to help us out with federal money, welfare type of thing. Or what a lot of people do, this island's too small for me, nothing's happening here, I'll just pick up and move to Atlanta, or move to Florida, or move to New York, or move to Houston. Because as a Virgin Islander, and being that our islands are under that U.S. flag, I can travel anywhere in the United States I feel like because I was born an American citizen by virtue of being born there. Fell some drizzle. Hope it's not rain, because I want to finish this video up. So we can do that. So we can bail out. We can leave the islands back there and just move on to what we consider to be bigger and better things, to step up in some people's minds, to seek a better life in a much bigger place where there might be more opportunities. So with that in mind, it's like I just feel like our islands are just there, just floating around on their own. That there's a big drain of brain power. Our young, brightest find opportunities in Atlanta, Washington, D.C., Seattle, Washington, Hawaii, Europe. Because, again, with our passports, we can travel quite a few places in this world and go elsewhere. This just leaves a lot of elderly people back home, or young children, or people who may feel that they're stuck or taking care of their families back home. So it bothers me that we then have to rely on tourism, which, not saying isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I hate the idea of feeling like we have to beg people to come to our islands, which they're beautiful, by the way, and yes, go and visit, and we're begging them to spend their money. But that's another problem that we have. There are people that come down on cruise ships, spend up all their money in the cruises, playing in the casinos in there, and coming out on land just to see the island, but not really spending any money. And we don't seem to have any other ways of generating revenue. But now, for where we are in the U.S. Virgin Islands and throughout the Caribbean, this is something that governments do that I don't like and I don't care for. And that is, if we can't generate money elsewhere or externally, let's go ahead and try to see if we can stifle our people to get the money out of them. It happens at my job also. So if we can't look around and generate money because we have other resources that appeals to the world market, well, guess what we do? Say, for example, you have an airline that wants to come to fly into St. Thomas or fly into St. Croix. Governments see this and like, how can we fleece this airline out of a bunch of money? Because they're coming from somewhere else. How can we make money off of them? Yeah, let's go ahead and throw in all these different taxes for landing here, for flying here. And those taxes, you will go ahead and buy a ticket, say round trip from New York City to St. Thomas. The ticket may cost $150. But when they're finished with the taxes, before you know it, you're spending $400. I might be exaggerating there, mind you. Okay? But the taxes are hard. And I'll give you an example. I was going to Guyana last year, my wife's country. And we were buying some tickets. And for the first time, I paid attention to all these taxes. Please forgive me, I have a cold here, okay? For the first time, I paid attention to these taxes. The ticket price, if I'm not mistaken, was like about $358 round trip, which is great to travel almost 3,000 miles from New York City all the way to Guyana. But when they were finished with the taxes, I think the tickets came out to about 600 something, upper 500s. And I go looking at the breakdown of the taxes, and there's a bunch of initials or acronyms or whatever they are, abbreviations. I have no idea what none of them were, what any of them were. QMP tax, $70. MLK tax, $45. By the time they finish adding up, I think it came out to an extra $292. So, do you think that these airlines are just going to go ahead and swallow all these taxes on their own? No. They're going to pass it on to you. They're going to pass it on to me in that ticket price. Somebody's going to pay for it. It's not going to be them. So now, you want to fly home to your home island. Understandably, this is not like a route, like say flying from here to St. Kitts, for example, in the Caribbean. This is not like you're always going to have a full flight every single day like you may have flying from Florida to New York or New York to Washington, D.C., the corridors in the eastern side of the United States where there are people always moving back and forth. Chances are you're not going to be able to fill up a plane with 200 people going to St. Kitts or Antigua every day of the week. So needless to say, that's another reason and incentive for these airlines to jack up the fares, because they're not always going to have a full flight. So guess what? You're going to have to pay for all those empty seats in there also. That's another thing. So before you know it now, you can barely afford to fly home. As a matter of fact, American Airlines introduced travel to Guyana. We were all excited, figuring, hey, competition. Flying from Miami or Fort Lauderdale to Guyana, which is probably roughly about, 1,800 miles or so. I'm not even sure. 2,000 miles? Not quite sure. So we're like, oh, great, competition for Caribbean Airlines. They're going to reduce these fares. Then they reveal the fares, and it's like $900 and up. And you're like, what? You can almost tell if you look at the breakdown of those taxes on that ticket. It's probably like a good third of that is just taxes. Then the other part, of course, the airline's probably charging for the empty seats that they fly down there on with. So that's one way of how these things happen. Other things could also include like, well, let's not pay our workers overtime pay, or let's discourage overtime or whatever. So let's squeeze as much as we can out of our own people to generate income. So because there's no other resources that they can rely on to bring in income, and tourism, of course, brings in quite a bit of money, but needing more, then it's like, where can we find money? Well, hey, guess what? I'll make sure I try to suppress wages, keep them down, or make sure that I don't have to pay more than I have to for services, or do things like ships coming in, airlines coming in, tax them to death. And of course, those places or those ships, those businesses, then pass the taxes on to the local people to go on them. Or to people wanting to go to these places. Now your prices are higher because of the taxes that are included. So that's an issue that I have, and I just wish it's a rock and a hard place, because if nothing much is going on back home, our young people are going to leave. They're going to move on to bigger and better things, places where they feel they can get better education, where they can get better opportunities. How do we entice them to stay home if we don't have certain things that appeal to them, certain industries that appeal to whatever their skills are? So we're just in this weird type of thing. And then we come over here and you meet, which I'm going to talk about them in a minute, but you meet white folks over here. And they're like, you're from where? You're from the Virgin. Oh, why do you live over here? Why are you over here? Because, of course, they have all this money. They see the beauty that we have in our islands. They see what we have left behind. And they're looking at us like we're nuts for coming over here. But we have families to feed. We have opportunities to call us. And guess what? We come over here to work in their place for them, while they go over to your place to enjoy where you come from. See some irony there, or something seeming weird about that? So they're coming over to where we are from to tell us how beautiful it is, how much they enjoy it, whatever. And we're over here sweating away in their industries, in their companies, in their corporations. Living in matchboxes, barely getting by. Don't know what a beach looks like because we don't go to them. Which leads to this now. Also in the U.S. Virgin Islands, there is a fare. It's always been there. And this is an inherent fare that we have as human beings. All right? Some of us are better at tempering it, avoid falling for the things that come out of it, and others are not. And this is what happens. We have situations where I can talk about St. Thomas and St. John in the U.S. Virgin Islands. On the southeastern end of the island, which is where I went to school and which is pretty much where I live anyway, as a little boy growing up over there and going to school, we always had a white population mixed in here and there. But it's come to the point now, all these years later, where you can go over to the southeastern part of St. Thomas and by extension over to St. John, and you almost have areas that are like white enclaves now, where you can find white people all over the place. And that fair I spoke about, this is what happens. I am not saying, and I don't believe that, of course, every white person is coming down there have bad intentions, that they're all racist. They mean us no good. Some people are there, white folks or people from other places, are there because they're looking for a better life. In their minds, a better life for them is on an island. They want to raise their families there. They feel more comfortable there. They're trying to get away from a bad divorce over here in the mainland, or just all the madness that goes on over here, and just want to live in a much more relaxed place. So they come to the islands. But you have some of them that come with an attitude of entitlement, and some of them who come there with their racist attitudes. And we know this for a fact. And considering all the things that has gone on with us as black folks, it is very easy for some of us to be rather suspicious to where things can lead, or the motivations of some people who are white. Again, this is not a blanket statement towards all white folks that they're all bad and they're all up to no good and they're all planning to do something and they plan to take over and so forth. But naturally, as their numbers increase, after a while, before you know it, they're running for office. And chances are they're going to suit the interests of people who look like them. Or, because of their money, they can take that money and influence local politicians who are people who have the same color as I, and perhaps influence certain things to their benefit. But what is happening is the fact that a lot of them have money, and they can come down and they can buy or build or whatever, throw up a big wall, and before you know it, the property value goes up. Taxes go up. So now, Mrs. So-and-so, whose family's been living in a little house next to this big fortress now, sees her taxes go up and can't afford it anymore. Or Mrs. So-and-so, whose family has been there for quite some time, has some young son or grandson who doesn't even live on the island, sees they can make some big money, and goes down like, oh, I live in Atlanta. You mean tell me I can sell that house and get X amount of thousands out of this? Hey, sell. I'm out of here. I don't live here anymore anyway. And so this is where these problems can lead, or can lead to certain problems. And before you know it, you have 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 houses, all owned by people who are not from the island, have their own little community. Next thing you know, it's gated. Next thing you know, you can't walk through there, you can't walk by there, looking at you suspicious. And people are going to feel a certain way about that. This is something that seems to be happening in St. John. And it seems to be stirring some issues, or certain fears, a little bit of angst that's going on over there. So understandably, this is a situation that concerns some people. Now, there's another thing that goes on that also bothers me, and it's this. Not far away is the British Virgin Islands. They are under the British flag, but they have different rules in terms of how things are done in terms of acquiring property. Please bear with me, okay? Hopefully you didn't see my nose running all over this thing. But anyway, over in the British Virgin Islands, and I may be recollecting this wrong or giving you the wrong information, but I know it's something like this. They have something over there called belonger status, meaning if you are from the British Virgin Islands, or you have ties to the British Virgin Islands, you're basically given first preference to when it comes to land and acquiring such things. Just because they're under the British flag does not mean that a British citizen from England can go over there and plant their legacy by buying property and so forth. You can't do that. If I'm not, maybe you can do it, maybe there's some ways to do it, but it's not like how it is in the U.S. Virgin Islands, which I'll explain soon. You have to live or be a resident of one of those British Virgin Islands over there for you, for 20 years before you can start talking about I'm buying this, and I'm getting this, and I'm getting that. In the U.S. Virgin Islands, where I'm from, under the U.S. flag, Joe Schmo can come from Wyoming, or Montana, or Indiana, or Alaska, or Hawaii, or Florida, come down there on a cruise, like how it looks, go back home, pack up everything, buy some property in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and move right in. And of course, a lot of times because they have more money, they can go ahead and buy whatever they want to buy and just move right on in. In the British Virgin Islands, it's not like that. And because we're under the U.S. flag, and because somehow the way our deal is structured with the federal government, just like it is in the United States, a person can leave one state, one city, and go to another one and buy land. I can't tell you anything. That's how it is in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So someone from Montana or Wyoming can just go right down there, buy land, buy property, and just start living. No qualifications. And when I say no qualifications, I mean no, well, hey, you know, you have to spend some time here. You have to be a resident of this place for X amount of years before you can do this. And some people are taking advantage of the situation, like in St. John, or Eastern St. Croix, or Southeastern St. Thomas. They're not doing anything illegal, but it has some residual effects to the local population. And this is what we're dealing with. So if you put all this together, no other resources to appeal in the world market, our young people leave. Go to look for opportunities elsewhere. Leaves a brain drain at home. Other people coming in who have the money, who have the resources, and sucking up or taking up space that is left behind by this flight of people leaving. And then, not to mention what just recently happened also. The hurricanes. A lot of people lost their homes, lost their roofs. Just can't deal with it and just like, hey, you know what? Forget it. I'm going to go live with my family in Atlanta. I'm going to move to Nevada. I'm going to move someplace else. Leaving depressed properties at home. What does this mean? Going down the road. What does this mean in the future? What are our islands going to look like? So these are some things that just concerned me while I was down there, and concerns me when I look around the Caribbean. Again, we depend so heavily on tourism. But again, look at what happened. These hurricanes knocked out our hotels. Where are you going to put these tourists? Damage our infrastructure, whatever little is there. How can we appeal to tourists to come to a place that's battered, beaten down? I'm not saying the ships have been coming back in again, mind you. But as the world changes, we have to also change, and we have to find other means of generating income without hurting our own people. I don't know if I have the answers, but for those of you who are watching this video, you may. It doesn't have to be just about the Virgin Islands. You can be looking at this video. You can be from Jamaica. You can be from St. Vincent. You can be from Trinidad and Tobago. You can be from St. Kitts and Nevis, Antigua. You may be looking at similar problems there. And maybe you have some suggestions. Maybe you have some answers. And of course, we have to deal with our sometimes incompetent political leaders who are looking out for their best interests, or who don't know what they're doing. We're having an election cycle coming up soon in the U.S. Virgin Islands, and so far it looks like a circus in many respects. So we don't know what's going to happen here. So we've got to come up with something. The world is changing. It's fast moving. And we've got to come up with something to keep our people home, to bring our brightest minds back home, to try to see if they can do something to make it a better place for all of us and our families back home. Yes, I'm here talking. I'm nowhere near home right now. But it doesn't mean my brain is not churning and thinking. And yes, I would love to move back home. And I'm thinking heavily about it. But I'm also thinking about things that we can do to make some changes, to do something different. Yes, we may be small islands, we may not have all the land and natural resources like a lot of other places. But as small as we are, I think there are things that we can do. Now, of course, there are other islands that have gone ahead and done certain things like offshore banking, offshore gambling, to the chagrin of the United States that tried to rain on their parades. Like the Cayman Islands, Bermuda, which has done well. I don't know if we can get away with that being under the U.S. because Uncle Sam wants to get his hand in as much taxes as he wants and doesn't want anyone hiding their money elsewhere. But again, I don't know what I can think about right now. I mean, of course, the world is also full of technology right now. That's one thing we can do. You don't need to have fruits growing in your backyard to appeal to a technological giant like, say, a Google or Microsoft or whatever. But I don't know. We need to get our act together, or else this world is going to run right past us. Well, that's me for now. Didn't think a lot of this through. I just did this on the spur. It's drizzling out here right now. It's a little cool. So I'm going to end this video right at this spot. And I'm going to upload it a little bit later on. But you guys can subscribe to the channel, share it. And I wish you guys can come in because I want to discuss this. I want to get some ideas. I want to hear what you guys are thinking in regard to what I was talking about. Again, you don't have to be from the Virgin Islands. I know a big part of this video is about the Virgin Islands, but I feel the same way about our other islands and just our region in general. Tell me what you think. What ideas do you have? What could we do? What could we do different? What could we do better? All right, you guys take care. See you in the comment section, okay? Bye.